at times hitting rock bottom or having everything taken away is the most beautiful gift you could have.
Welcome to the Grant Wise Show. This podcast helps ordinary real estate agents build extraordinary companies. Let's grow in 3, 2. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Grant Wise Show. I am very excited for our guest today. I've got the one and only, this is Kathleen Black. She is globally recognized as a high-performance mindset and performance expert. She's a 2-time best-selling author, and she is a renowned transformational speaker. She has a very unique and holistic approach to empowered leadership and genius mindset, which is something I'm excited to dive into. And she's guided iconic brands and high net worth professionals to add billions of additional dollars in sales volume to their company. So Kathleen, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us on the show today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You have quite the background. As we were talking about kind of pre-show, I was like, I can't read all of your accolades in the intro. So tell us the story. How did you put yourself in the position you're in today?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's always the question, right? So I think it's, everything's a journey, but I went from being an investor. That's how I got into the real estate industry, from an investor to a top producing realtor to coaching, top 1% national producers. I ran the first team specific coaching company for real estate in Canada. And that eventually led me to sell my shares in that company. I owned half of it, ran it completely. And then I started my current company. So essentially I went from investor to top producer to coach to now, we have a multi-7-figure company. I have a team of coaches, who have different areas of expertise. So, that's the very Coles Notes version, but I did it using, the same tools that I help other people coach, right? The mindset, the vision. My big movement is shift for a reason, probably because I've shifted so many times. Our wounds are our wisdom. And I think that's very true with me as well.
Our wounds are our wisdom. I love that.
Our scars, our healed wounds. Yeah.
Yeah. What is it that you teach about leadership? Kind of walk us through the framework. What is it that you teach that helps people as they shift have so much success?
Well, a lot. I think there's different ways to look at leadership. For me, it starts with the self. I get asked a lot, when did you start being a leader? I was like, well, I think when I started to take responsibility for myself is when I became a leader. And I would say that that's the start of everything with coaching, being in a high level of integrity. And I call it the inside out method. So we really work with people to get aligned, clear, confident, unforgiving in a good way about who they are, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what their gifts are, because I believe everyone has a genius area or a gift. So we help people really go inside. And that's truly a superpower because the world's noisy, right? The real estate industry this year, holy moly, there's just so much going on. And yeah, if you wait for the outside to motivate you, you're probably going to be in trouble, right? So if you can help people get a vision inside of who they are and understand what makes them tick, what their values are, and align their vision, their values with where they want to go, you can really power people up. So that's the first pillar of everything we do. And from there, there's the business side of shifting, from a solopreneur, from a GCI mindset, if you're in real estate sales, into a business owner mentality, a net income mentality. Of course, there's systems, there's tools, but honestly, I can't get people to implement the systems and tools to get them where they want if I can't get their vision and their mindset right. It's like they just won't do it.
100%, because they're not typically, right, they're not operating in alignment with what they ultimately want for their life.
Yeah.
A coach that I work with, he says, if you want to change your outer world, you got to change your inner world.
Mm-hmm.
And I love your approach because I've seen that is evidence in my life. Every time I've wanted to change something going on outside, I had to go in, which is not easy to do. There's a lot of stuff that most of us got buried down in there, typically for a reason, right? That we want to work through. How have you experienced that? And I know that this is not like a one size fits all approach, but challenging people to go inside is not easy. How do you do that? How do you help somebody kind of go within themselves to figure out what they need to ultimately do?
people who know my community, we have certain rudimentary things like here, I'm going to assign you to do something as part of it. I mean, there's a lot of visualization work. We do something called a letter from the future. And I mean, I have great reverence for it. I've done it, in the highest peaks of my life. I've done extra ones in the lowest points of my life because we need to have that true north. And a letter from the future is much more powerful than a vision board because you're actually embodying where you're seeing yourself, whether it's 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years, but our community does them every year, every 1 year. And what's beautiful about it, it's the most powerful way one of the most powerful ways that you can align your unconscious and your conscious mind. Because your conscious mind is like, I want to make $1 million. I want to sell this many homes. I want to have this many clients. It's like, yeah, great. Guess what? Your unconscious mind is driving 98 to 99% of the show. And it's like, yeah, that's all fine that you want that, but we really want to stay home Saturdays and Sundays. And we really like going to art galleries and openings. And this is what we value. So it's like your conscious mind is the destination. Your unconscious mind is the GPS. So the GPS is going to put you on all these crazy detours, right? If it's not aligned. So we do the letter from the future because it forces people in a good way to take on the most powerful thing I can influence them to give themselves, which is their ability to create. Right? All great leaders are creators. So when you get into this letter and you actually feel it, hear it, sense it, right? Like you fully embody it, it becomes real for you. And all of a sudden, 1 year later, you're like, wow, some of that's kind of uncanny. Some of that happened. And I took 2-3 years in, people are like, okay, I'll do this the rest of my life. Like 75% of it is happening is because we don't see our own power as humans. It's not cliche. It's just true.
Yeah. That's so good. I know this isn't a personal development podcast, but I kind of wish that it was, because this is I love geeking out on psychology, human behavior, because personal development has been such a big part of my journey. I think it is for most entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship is one of the most challenging and spiritual endeavors I've ever probably personally been on. And I say all that. This is like, I like doing the podcast because I kind of get coached for free. You just gave me a good one. So I appreciate you. Yeah, I'm going to put that one in the bank and send you a gift after I do it, because I love the exercise that you're talking about. Because if we can see ourselves in the future, right, and we can create that reality, I would imagine that you can see an experience, you can kind of like live in how good that feels. And what I like to do personally is see how am I going to feel if I don't do this, and kind of pre-experience the pain, because I've learned just through trying to analyze the duality of life, it's not always just about how good we'll feel, but also how painful it will be if we get or don't get what it is that we're after, because that can really motivate us too. Have you seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think some people feel they have more of an even keel life. And I always say, at times hitting rock bottom or having everything taken away is the most beautiful gift you could have, because it gives you that tension to actually create what you're capable of. And I think the best coaches, the best leaders, the best, speakers, they've had a lot of dark days. So they realize the power of tools like this, right? Like when everything is black and you can write a letter for the future and it literally lights your path, and people are like, oh, aren't you going to lose everything? You're like, oh no, I'm living in 6 months from now or 12 months from now. The edge and power that gives you is unreal. Like there's a metamorphosis that always happens in entrepreneurship. You always have a level of creation, which means you have a level of destruction. And it can be shocking for people to say like, oh, I wanted to double my business. I didn't know that it was going to literally put me into, for some people initially, workaholic mode, and there was destruction in their fitness and their relationships, and they don't know how to deal with that. It's like, you have to be able to go down and go, oh, okay, I need that new vision. I need to do it in a different way, but it's going to come out on the other side. And once they do it once or twice, like, oh, now I get it, right? I'm not losing everything. I'm leveling up, but you have to have that vision, because if you don't, you get lost. So yeah, I don't know if I answer what you're saying, but I think so.
I think it's awesome. I am fascinated by this. And I'm also fascinated by something that I mentioned in your intro, which is genius mentality. What is genius mentality or genius mindset?
Yeah, genius mindset is something we do. So we work with people, either solopreneurs, expansion phase, or teams. So in the expansion phase is where we have that big shift from, like, again, solopreneur mindset, and we're trying to shift into business owner. And that's where we spend the time to really dive into, what am I great at? What lights me up? What brings me joy? What actually makes me tick in this business? And that becomes our foundation for leverage. So even, for example, with our coaching team, like, I used to try to train everybody on everything. So it's like I've got 10 years full time training like top teams, and I'm trying to train a new coach, right, on how to do that. And finally, one day I was on stage, and it was actually a weird aha moment on stage where I like talking about like Henry Ford and, the piecemeal, like segmented selling, just to get people understanding it. And I was saying, he had Great Depression, had lots of people. It's like, when you have a great team, the sales agents only need to know their portion, and they can be 98% in their lane. So they can be so fantastic, right? Because they don't have the other pieces. And I'm on stage and I'm like, exactly. Why am I trying to train everybody to be like high expert level and high level of experience in something that they're not natural to? So I took my own medicine for coaching clients and applied it to our team. And so it's like, we have people and they actually operate a high level just in their genius zones. So if they love Excel and budgets and contracts and, like creating compensation for team members, or they love sales training and analytics, whatever, right? They love strategy. And I've just learned that I think one of the things that a lot of coaches didn't have when they were young was the right encouragement. I've learned this talking to a lot of speakers and coaches. A lot of us felt really misunderstood. And I think because of that, I love seeing what's great about other people. I just love it. So I'll talk to them and be like, do you realize you're really good at this? Or have you ever thought about doing that? So with clients over the years, it's always trying to get them to see, here's where your passion is. Here's your genius area. Either it's in the business or it's not. And if it's not, that's okay. Let's set up the business to be a vehicle so you can do it outside of the business. But in real estate, we're lucky. We have a pretty big playing field, right? So usually we find their genius, and that leads to understanding, again, like dollar per hour and leverage and the things we can take off their plate. And it starts to make them understand how to leverage and scale. So it's our gifts, right, that we bring to the business, and just leaning into them.
That's so good. I think that I could not agree more with you that if you can really lean in and find what it is that lights you up and that you're very good at, and you can lean into that, and then you can certainly bring in other people that you can depend on to be your counterparts. You can build these phenomenal companies. If I'm sitting here listening to this, I'm probably curious, like, well, I wonder what I'm a genius at. How do I go about identifying my zone of genius?
Yeah, great question. And this is the part, like my dad always said, life's not fair. Who said that? It's true. But this part I always say is extra unfair. Like, we see our gifts typically last. The people around us can see our gifts so much easier than us, because typically when it's a gift, it's you feel joyous, you feel energized, unless you do too much of it, but you feel joyous, you feel energized, but also it feels easy for you. So some of my top gifts were things like I was fighting for, I'm fighting for these opportunities on stage, or I'm fighting to do a higher level of training. I'm not even noticing, like, there's no one else behind me at that time in my life, in line. Like, they weren't going like, I want to memorize this script and show up tomorrow, but I wanted that so much because I loved it. So team and community and having mentors and coaches and family are so very important, right? They mirror to us what we're great at. And if you have a high performance culture, they want to invest in what you're great at, which is just so great, right? Like, people mirroring the way they see life at you amplifies your potential. So talking to people and saying, what do you rely on me for, right? Like, what's the one thing you would think of me for if you needed something, right? What do you think about that I do the best, that stands out? And also look at the things. There's no easy answer, because you also want to go into your values. Like, when I did all the work and do with clients to go into my values, I know my values are challenge, freedom, knowledge acquisition, contribution. Like, in general, to be a contributor is very, very important to me, and a bit of rebellion. I know that. So those things are in my genius. They fire me up. I say no to things that don't give me any of that, right?
Oh, that's fantastic. I don't think I would ever thought to have gone there. Ask somebody else, what do you rely on me for? I've gone through these practices before, but it's been a lot of like self-discovery, not, and that is too, but not like go to somebody and say, hey, what do you think I'm really good at? It's such a good idea. It's also so simple. I think I've noticed a trend in a lot of what you're a lot of what you teach. It all seems pretty simple.
It is. The systems aren't always as simple, but the investing in ours, it's simple. It's simple stuff. Sometimes it's hard for people to do it. And I want to say, like, genius might sound like, oh, okay, it's what I'm good at. Like, to scale a business, you're going to have pinch years where you do things you don't love, right? Or maybe you're not good at. Like, I've had years and years of that. I get it. But eventually, like, you want to get to a point where you know your strengths and your weaknesses very intimately, because if you don't, people will manipulate you. You won't be able to negotiate on your own behalf. And this is a problem, whether you're a realtor, you're a team leader like me. As a speaker for years, that backfired on me, because I didn't really, or a trainer, as a coach, I didn't understand my own value. I had no ability to see it. So I couldn't negotiate for myself. And that's nobody's fault but my own, right? So going to our peers and making sure we understand those things as entrepreneurs, I think are infinitely important.
I could not agree more. 1,000%. I had something that I was going to say, but I kind of lost it. So I'm going to go to my next question. If it comes back to me, I'll jump back. How do you find those people? Once you find your strengths, how do you go out there? And this is something I hear often, because I tend to attract in my own life a lot of visionary types, because I'm a visionary. So a lot of my language is going to pull more of those people towards me. And it puts me in a position where I'm meeting with a lot and talking to a lot of people like, how do I find my integrator or my admin or my this person? Like, what is your advice typically to people about, okay, I know what my genius is. Now, how do I find the stuff that has somebody to help me with the stuff I'm not so great at?
Yeah, like it's that 3-step approach, right? Know myself, learn to understand others, and pair with greatness. So first, it'll be very hard to understand the greatness in others until you understand yourself. And that might sound like this, like, woo, I don't mean it like that. Like, even from a DISC perspective or a Colby perspective or an emotional intelligence perspective, like, until I understand as a leader how I operate, I don't understand or see the value in people who might be 180 on the other side. So for example, I'm a driver, I'm fast paced. I'm like, go, go, go. Somebody who's a bit slower, more detail oriented, I might be like, oh my gosh, they're driving me crazy, right? Like, I can't have this person around. So if once I understand, oh wow, the business needs something, the business needs the books being done better, the business needs my CRM picked up. Okay, who would be the person who would be great at that? Okay, they're this archetype. I need to bring that archetype in. And for some visionary leaders and entrepreneurs, our pace is so fast that at a certain point, it's not even an integrator, it's a buffer. Like, your other ops person or your other leader buffers you to the people who are different paces and different detail oriented, because you don't speak the same language. You're just too far apart. You drive them crazy, they drive you crazy. So you end up to have people who help you to bring in the talent you need, but also make them feel appreciated, which they deserve, right? So it's knowing the business, knowing what you need, but also understanding, like, so many people hire another them, right? They hire themselves. And I see this in whole teams, right? They'll hire the exact same personality or the opposite. If they're really strong drivers, they'll hire like cheer. And I don't mean in that way, like, people are great energy who pump up the energy. It's like, okay, but your database management is a high influencer relationship based networker. Like, what's going on here? You know what I mean? So once you know yourself, you're like, okay, I'm doing that because I want to appease my own dominant personality, right?
How important is it to have a coach? Like, a lot of what you're talking about, it seems like it would be great to have somebody to throw this stuff back and forth with. And obviously that's kind of a loaded question, because this is a lot of what you do, but and it's not intended that way, but I have a coach in almost every area of my life. I recognize the importance of it. But from your perspective, like, how important is it to have people in your life that can really help you understand and move through life in all aspects?
We've come out, most largely it's thought of that we've come out of the information era and we've moved well into the wisdom era, right? And the wisdom era is the time of intellectual property, is the time of moving down experience at a much higher rapid pace. And that's not just about technology. That's also about humans. And if you don't have a coach, if you don't have a vetted community, you're literally trying to create something that's been perfected like 50 years ago or 30 years ago or 20 years ago. And the amount of money I see people leave on the table, let alone personal fulfillment, I'm not even going to say development, fulfillment, is just like, it blows my mind, right? Somebody will come in, and I think there's two sides of this coin. Like, we do systems and some coaching is to have access to a network. Other coaching is like ours. It's holistic. It's mindset, energy, whatever. and other coaching has the system. So for us, it's like, we already have the system and the data on what works, what doesn't. And then we'll see people spend like 10 times more than coaching trying to test something new out. So to me, if I need to do something important, I get a coach or I get a consultant or I get a program, unless you're finally to the top where it's like you need to truly be an innovator. And I mean, that's an amazing place, but people get there because they have lots of coaches. Like that's the truth. They go up and up and up and up, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the truth, 100%. Oh, that's such a good conversation. This has been such a good conversation. I like how this has kind of naturally turned into a series of steps that somebody could take to start to develop themselves personally. And I think it starts with, what we talked about at the beginning, which is writing yourself a letter, like future pacing and visualizing what it is that you ultimately want your life to look like. And every stop along the way, you kind of pick up something else that's really, really important. And I think that having a coach to ride alongside, I think it's just one of the most impactful things you can do. I followed obviously Tony Robbins for most of my professional career, most of my personal development. And it's just how he said, as he says it, it's how you can compress decades into days. It's just by going and finding people that are already where you want to be and listening to them and taking their advice. I think it's a pretty consistent theme in a lot of people that I've interviewed too, is as we're all on this journey trying to go from whatever our version of ordinary to extraordinary is, that having somebody that can help guide you throughout the process is very critical. So a lot of great stuff. So I want to respect your time. I think I want to kind of end with, if I'm listening to this and I'm bought into a lot of what you're telling me to do, what is like that first step that I could go take that would help me as I'm, trying to develop myself? Give me a bit of a framework. Like, what could I do now as I go pursue building something extraordinary?
And you know what? This is an interesting question. It's kind of like when people say, is it systems or mindset? What's the ratio, right? And so with one of my keynotes, I always make sure I say it depends where you're at on the journey. So if you are new coming into a career or real estate, or you're not new, but you're trying to level up, right? You're like, hey, I feel capped. Definitely then I would say make sure you have a growth mindset and you're coachable, but spend 80% of your time on tried, test, and true systems. And I know it's like tried, test, and true, but it's real, right? Like for me, I mean, if I can convert every face-to-face buyer at 98% or 96%, that's a game changer, right? In your career, 90% or 80%, right? Same thing with listings. So if you're trying to build as a solopreneur, a salesperson on a team, 100% make sure you're tracking your actual day-to-day core activities. Like that's how I level people up with that foundation. Letter for the future, values, goals. Then where are our holes in our bucket? Like what tools do we not have? Particularly if you're using digital marketing. I mean, we're all about like, let's be strong every single step on the journey. Then when you level up, it's a little bit different. It comes into that genius mode, how you see your business, how you think about it. And then it shifts again because you become the coach, where you're transferring a predictable outcome, both for your clients as well as for your team members, in order for them to be successful. So depending where you're at on that process, you're going to have a very different next step. So I hope you identify with one of those three if you're listening and moving forward from there.
And I'm glad that I remembered before we got off the podcast. I remember what I was going to say a little earlier because you reminded me. It sounds like this is something that is you're always evolving. It's not like where you get to a level. Like a lot of people think like, well, if I just get here, like I'm going to be good. And I think a lot of people sometimes maybe are let down or surprised by the fact that you get to that new level, and really ultimately you're at a new level, but you have also developed a new level of problems. It sounds like we're always in this kind of like evolutionary mode when we're growing in business too. Is that right?
Yeah. And you can't unknow what you know, and you can't go back to being who you were. You can't. Like as humans, we're constantly looking to evolve. That's why we're in entrepreneurship, or that's why we're in sales. Like we're looking to evolve in different ways. And I think that's why, sometimes when people evolve so much in business and then leadership, and then it turns energetic or spiritual or religious, whatever it is for you, because we're just looking for different ways to feel more whole and complete. And I think that's at the core of humanity, right? That's what we're looking to do. So I couldn't imagine for any entrepreneur, other than wanting a break, which we're not good at sometimes, to not want to evolve, because it would feel like being stagnant. And for most entrepreneurs, being stagnant feels almost like deep depression. So I would think we'll grow. Yeah.
It really does. I heard Harmozy say this the other day. He's like, everybody wants to talk about what it is about champions that's so much different than everybody else. And that's kind of the wrong way to think about it. The reality is most champions are broken. It's not that they don't have something that everybody else doesn't have. It's that they don't have an off switch. They just never stop. And like, that's kind of what entrepreneurship is we just never stop. And when we do, it actually is, it's not fun. The fun is the chaos for us.
Yeah, it's so funny you say this, because I actually contemplated with my community, and I didn't end up to today, but I was on with our coaching community. I was contemplating saying, listen, guys, like, I'm really, really good at high performance. I'm not so good at non-high performance, which you would think sounds like a show off, but trust me, it's not. Like, it has its own, like, no, you got to rest and chill and adjust. So, I mean, that's part of the growth process too, learning to balance it out.
I think I've talked about potentially hosting a wellness retreat. I'm like, yeah, we'll go relax. At least that's how we'll market it, because I know that nobody in our environment would be able to sit down and relax for a day or two or whatever. So, yeah. Anyways, Kathleen, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you spending some time with us and sharing your genius with our audience here. This has been a very good conversation, and I'm very glad that I got to meet you face to face. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad I got to meet you as well. This is fantastic. I appreciate it.
Love it. Thank you all for continuing to listen to The Grant Wise Show. This has been another amazing episode to help you understand how to go from ordinary to extraordinary. And if you didn't pick up something here, you weren't listening. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you on the next episode. Peace. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Grant Wise Show. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, leave us a review, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks.